You're just the babysitter, Olivia. Don't get confused about your place in this family. Mark Hartwell's words cut through the elegant dinner party like a knife, his champagne glass raised in mock toast as his colleagues laughed appreciatively. I smiled politely, excused myself from the table, and walked away with my head held high. 3 days later, at his funeral, his children would say something that would silence every person who had ever dismissed me. But this story begins 5 years earlier, with a desperate widower, 2 heartbroken children, and a woman everyone assumed was just hired help.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh.
The brass nameplate on the gate read Hartwell Estate in elegant script, and as I drove through those iron gates for the first time 5 years ago, I had no idea I was entering a carefully constructed lie. The sprawling Tudor mansion sat on 3 acres of manicured lawns in Millbrook Heights, the kind of neighborhood where success was measured by square footage and the silence of well-trained staff. I was 26 then, fresh out of my child development master's program and drowning in student loans. The nanny position had seemed like a godsend, live-in care for 2 children, ages 6 and 8, with a generous salary that would finally let me breathe financially. What the job posting hadn't mentioned was that I'd be walking into a house still haunted by grief. Mark Hartwell opened the door himself that first day, and I was struck by how different he looked from his corporate headshots I'd found online. The confident CEO of Hartwell Industries appeared smaller somehow, his expensive suit hanging loose on his frame, dark circles under his eyes despite his practiced smile. "You must be Olivia Carson," he said, extending a hand that felt surprisingly cold. "Thank you for coming. The children they're having a difficult time adjusting." That was the understatement of the century. 8-year-old Anna Hartwell sat curled in the corner of the massive living room, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit and staring at nothing. Her younger brother Clay, barely 6, hadn't spoken a word since I'd arrived, according to the previous nanny who was hastily packing her belongings. "They've been through 4 nannies in 6 months, Mark explained quietly as we watched the woman struggle with her suitcase. Anna keeps telling them to leave. Clay just disappears, hides in the house for hours. We find him in closets, under beds, sometimes in his mother's old study." The children's mother, Sheila Hartwell, had died in a car accident 8 months earlier. From the photos scattered throughout the house, she'd been beautiful, vibrant smile, kind eyes, the type of woman who probably volunteered at school fundraisers and never missed a soccer game. The type of woman whose absence would leave a crater in her children's lives. "I don't expect miracles," Mark continued, though his voice suggested otherwise. "I just need someone who won't give up on them." I knelt down to Anna's level that first evening, not too close, respecting the invisible barrier she'd built around herself. "I'm Olivia," I said simply. "I'm going to be staying here for a while." Anna's green eyes, so much like her father's, fixed on mine with startling intensity. "Are you going to leave too?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not unless you want me to," I replied honestly. Something flickered across her face. Not trust, that would take much longer, but perhaps the faintest possibility of hope. Those first weeks were brutal. Anna tested every boundary I set, her grief manifesting as anger that she hurled at anyone who dared to comfort her. She'd lock herself in her room during dinner time, refuse baths, and wake screaming from nightmares about car crashes and hospitals. Clay, meanwhile, seemed to be slowly disappearing into himself, communicating only in nods and headshakes, spending hours arranging and rearranging his toy cars in precise lines. But I'd worked with traumatized children before. I understood that their behavior wasn't personal, it was survival. Anna's anger was safer than sadness. Clay's silence was a shield against a world that had become unpredictable and dangerous. I started small, reading to Clay from his mother's favorite books, letting Anna help me bake cookies even when she accidentally spilled flour everywhere. I didn't try to replace their mother or force family bonding moments. I simply existed in their space consistently, reliably, until they began to trust that I wouldn't vanish, like everyone else seemed to. Mark, meanwhile, threw himself into his work with the fervor of a man running from his grief. Hartwell Industries was expanding internationally, and he traveled constantly, sometimes for weeks at a time. When he was home, he moved through the house like a ghost, present but not really there, going through the motions of fatherhood without connecting to his children's actual needs. It was during one of his month-long business trips to Europe that Anna first called me Mom. She'd fallen off her bike, scraping her knee badly enough to need stitches. As I held her in the emergency room, stroking her hair while the doctor worked, she'd whispered it so quietly I almost missed it. "Mom, it hurts." My heart nearly stopped. When I looked down at her tear-streaked face, she seemed as surprised as I was. "I'm sorry," she started to say, but I shook my head. "You don't need to be sorry for anything, sweetheart," I whispered back, and she buried her face against my shoulder with a sob that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. That night, as I tucked both children into bed, Clay spoke for the first time in months. "Olivia, will you sing Mommy's song?" Sheila's song, I learned, was a simple lullaby about moonbeams and starlight that she'd sung to them every night. I'd found the lyrics written in her handwriting in Anna's baby book months earlier. As I sang the familiar words, both children's eyes grew heavy with the first peaceful sleep they'd had in almost a year. When Mark returned from his trip, he found a transformed household. Anna was laughing again, helping me plan Clay's 7th birthday party. Clay was not only speaking, but chattering excitedly about everything from dinosaurs to his favorite breakfast cereal. They were still grieving, they always would be, but they were healing. "How did you do it?" Mark asked me that evening, his voice filled with wonder as he watched his children through the kitchen window, chasing fireflies in the backyard for the first time since their mother's death. "I didn't do anything special," I replied, cleaning up the remnants of Clay's birthday cake. "I just loved them." Mark's expression grew complicated then, something shifting behind his eyes that I couldn't quite read. "They seem to love you too," he said quietly, "maybe more than they should." I should have recognized the warning in those words, should have understood that Mark Hartwell wasn't the type of man who appreciated having his control challenged, even by the woman who had saved his children. But I was too focused on Anna and Clay, too invested in their healing, to notice the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Because in Mark Hartwell's carefully constructed world, there were roles to be played and hierarchies to be maintained. And in his mind, I was just the babysitter. He had no idea how wrong he was about to be proven. The first crack in our carefully balanced world appeared on a Tuesday morning in March when I found Mark hunched over his laptop in his study at 6 a.m., still wearing yesterday's clothes. Empty scotch glass sat beside him, and the screen displayed what looked like financial documents covered in red numbers. "Mark?" I knocked softly on the doorframe. "The children are asking about breakfast. You usually eat with them on Tuesdays." He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused. For a moment, he seemed confused about where he was. Then his expression hardened into the mask I'd grown accustomed to seeing whenever he felt vulnerable. "Tell them I'm busy," he said curtly, turning back to the screen. "And Olivia, this is a private conversation, family business." The dismissal stung, though I tried not to show it. After 2 years of caring for his children, of being present for every scraped knee, every nightmare, every milestone, I was still being reminded of my place as hired help. Anna appeared in the hallway behind me, already dressed for school in the pink dress I'd helped her pick out the night before. "Is Daddy coming to breakfast?" she asked, peering around me into the study. "Daddy's working," I said gently, closing the study door, "but I made your favorite pancakes." What I didn't mention was the phone call I'd overheard the night before, Mark's voice carrying through the thin walls of the old house as he'd paced in his bedroom. "I don't care what it takes, Brian. Find the money. The Popplewell merger cannot fall through." Brian Carson, no relation to me, despite the shared surname, was Mark's business partner and oldest friend. They'd built Hartwell Industries together from a small construction company into a major development firm. But lately, Brian's visits to the house had become tense affairs.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Hushed conversations that stopped whenever I entered the room.
It was during Clay's 8th birthday party 2 weeks later that everything began to unravel. Mark had been away on another business trip, missing his son's special day for the 3rd year running. I'd organized everything myself: the dinosaur theme Clay loved, invitations to his classmates, a cake shaped like a triceratops that had taken me hours to perfect. The party was in full swing when Brian Carson arrived unexpectedly, his face grim as he pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Olivia, I need to speak with Mark immediately. It's urgent." "He's in Singapore," I replied, washing frosting from cake plates. "He won't be back until Thursday." Brian's expression darkened. Thursday might be too late. He glanced toward the living room where children's laughter echoed. "Look, you seem like a smart woman. You must have noticed the stress Mark's been under." I paused in my washing, suddenly alert. What kind of stress? "The company's in serious trouble. The Popplewell deal was supposed to save us, but there have been complications. Mark's been making some questionable decisions to try to keep us afloat." The way he said questionable made my blood run cold. What kind of decisions? Brian hesitated, clearly wrestling with how much to reveal. Finally, he pulled out his phone and showed me a bank statement. The account was in Mark's name, but the numbers didn't make sense. Large deposits followed by immediate withdrawals, patterns that looked suspiciously like money laundering. "This is just the tip of the iceberg," Brian said quietly. "There are other accounts, other transactions. Mark's been desperate, and desperate men make dangerous choices." I felt the room spinning slightly as the implications hit me. "The children," I whispered. "If this comes out." "That's why I'm telling you," Brian said, his voice urgent. "You care about those kids more than anyone. If this explodes, and it's going to explode soon, they're going to need someone who can protect them from the fallout." Before I could respond, Anna burst into the kitchen, chocolate cake smeared across her face. "Olivia, Clay's blowing out his candles. Come see." I forced a smile and followed her back to the party, but Brian's words echoed in my mind. That night, after all the guests had gone home and the children were asleep, I found myself standing in Mark's study, staring at his locked filing cabinet. I wasn't snooping, at least that's what I told myself. I was cleaning up, organizing the chaos of papers scattered across his desk from his hurried departure for Singapore. But when I saw the bank statements mixed in with utility bills, when I noticed the letterhead from the Securities and Exchange Commission partially hidden under a coffee mug, my hands moved almost involuntarily. The SEC letter was dated 3 days earlier, an investigation into suspicious financial activity at Hartwell Industries, potential charges of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The words blurred together as I read, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would wake the children upstairs. At the bottom of the letter, a handwritten note in Mark's familiar scrawl: "Offshore accounts activated. Singapore transfer complete. Tell no one." My hands shook as I photographed the letter with my phone, some instinct telling me this evidence might be important later. I was just returning the papers to their exact positions when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop looking where you don't belong. Some secrets are worth killing for." I nearly dropped the phone, my blood turning to ice. The text had been sent from a burner number, impossible to trace, but the message was clear. Someone knew I'd been in Mark's study. Someone was watching. I rushed upstairs to check on Anna and Clay, finding them sleeping peacefully, unaware that their father's secrets were threatening to destroy the only stable life they'd known since their mother's death. As I stood in their doorway, watching their innocent faces in the moonlight, I made a decision that would change everything. Whatever Mark had done, whatever consequences were coming, I would protect these children, even if it meant going against the man who paid my salary, even if it meant risking my own safety. I would not let Anna and Clay become casualties of their father's crimes. I just had no idea how far Mark would go to protect his secrets, or how dangerous it would become to stand between him and his desperate attempts to maintain his perfect facade. Mark returned from Singapore 3 days later, But the man who walked through the front door wasn't the same person who had left. His usual controlled demeanor had cracked, replaced by something frantic and dangerous. He barely acknowledged the children's excited greetings, brushing past them like they were furniture as he headed straight to his study. "Daddy brought us presents," Clay announced, holding up a small wooden elephant. "Look, Olivia." I admired the carved figurine, but my attention was fixed on the closed study door and the raised voices coming from behind it. Brian had arrived within an hour of Mark's return, and their conversation had grown increasingly heated. "The accounts are frozen, Mark," Brian's voice carried through the oak panels. "The feds moved faster than we anticipated. Singapore was supposed to be untouchable." "Keep your voice down," Mark hissed. "The children don't need to hear this." "The children are going to hear a lot worse when this hits the news," Brian shot back. "We need to discuss damage control, legal representation, and what we're going to do about Olivia." My blood turned cold. What about me? "She doesn't know anything," Mark said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Are you sure about that? She's been living in this house for 2 years, Mark. She sees everything, hears everything. She's not stupid." "She's just the babysitter, Brian. She changes diapers and makes lunch. She's not a threat." The casual dismissal would have hurt under normal circumstances, but now it filled me with something darker. Just the babysitter? The woman who had saved his children from their grief, who had held his family together while he traveled the world making increasingly desperate business deals, was just the babysitter? "We need to consider our options," Brian continued, his voice dropping to a whisper I had to strain to hear. "If she becomes a liability—" "What are you suggesting?" Mark's voice was sharp. "I'm suggesting we make sure she understands the importance of loyalty and the consequences of betrayal." That evening, after the children were asleep, Mark knocked on my bedroom door. I'd been expecting this conversation, but I wasn't prepared for how different he looked. Older somehow, his usual confidence replaced by something predatory. "We need to talk," he said, inviting himself into my private space without permission. I kept my expression neutral, though every instinct screamed danger. "Of course. Is everything all right?" Mark closed the door behind him and leaned against it, blocking my exit. "That depends on you, Olivia. You've been very good to my children, very observant. I appreciate that quality in you." The way he said observant made my skin crawl. "I care about Anna and Clay very much." "I know you do, which is why I'm sure you understand that their well-being depends on stability, on discretion." His eyes fixed on mine with uncomfortable intensity. "Children need security, don't they? A roof over their heads, food on the table, the same caregiver they've grown attached to." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Comply or lose access to the children. "Of course," I said carefully. "Their security is my top priority." "Good." Mark's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Then we understand each other. Some business matters require privacy, Olivia, family matters that outsiders wouldn't understand. I trust I can count on your continued discretion." After he left, I sat on my bed with trembling hands, finally understanding the true scope of what I'd stumbled into. Mark wasn't just hiding financial crimes. He was prepared to threaten anyone who might expose them, including the woman who had become a mother to his children. But if Mark thought intimidation would silence me, he had seriously miscalculated. That night, I began my own investigation in earnest. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Anna herself. She'd been having trouble sleeping again, waking from nightmares about losing another parent. As I comforted her one night, she mentioned something that made my blood freeze. "Olivia, why was Daddy shouting at Uncle Brian about Mommy's money?" I kept my voice calm despite my racing heart. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Last week, when I went to get water, they were in Daddy's study talking about Mommy's account.
Daddy said Uncle Brian was stupid for moving Mommy's money to the bad place. Sheila's money. Mark had been using his dead wife's accounts as part of his money laundering scheme. Did you hear anything else? I asked gently. Anna nodded, her green eyes serious in the lamplight. Daddy said if anyone found out about Mommy's money, he would make them disappear, like Mommy did. The casual way she repeated those words, make them disappear, like Mommy did, sent ice through my veins. Was Mark suggesting that Sheila's death hadn't been an accident? Over the next week, I began piecing together a horrifying picture. Using my access to Mark's home office during his frequent absences, I discovered documents that painted Sheila not as the perfect wife and mother I'd imagined, but as a woman who had discovered her husband's crimes and threatened to expose them.
Bank records showed Sheila had been asking questions about discrepancies in their joint accounts just weeks before her death. Email drafts on Mark's computer revealed her growing suspicions about his business practices. And buried in a folder marked Insurance Claims was a police report about her car accident that raised more questions than it answered. Brake failure on a vehicle that had been serviced just days before. No mechanical explanation for the failure. A route she never normally took, leading to an isolated stretch of road with no witnesses. But the most damning evidence was a recorded phone conversation I found on Mark's computer, apparently saved by mistake in his backup files. It was dated 2 days before Sheila's death. "She knows too much, Brian." Mark's voice was clear despite the poor audio quality. "She's threatening to go to the authorities." "We can reason with her," Brian replied. "Explain the stakes." "No, she's too principled, too stubborn. She'll never understand that this is bigger than her moral qualms." "So what are you suggesting?" There was a long pause before Mark answered, his voice cold and calculated. "I'm suggesting we solve the problem permanently. Make it look accidental. A car accident on a rainy night, perhaps." The recording ended there, but I didn't need to hear more. Mark Hartwell hadn't just committed financial crimes. He had murdered his wife to keep her quiet. And now he was prepared to do the same to anyone else who threatened his secrets, including me. As I sat in the darkness of my room, the weight of this knowledge crushing down on me, I realized that everything had changed. This wasn't just about protecting 2 grieving children anymore. This was about seeking justice for their murdered mother and ensuring that Mark Hartwell never had the chance to hurt anyone else. But I also knew that if Mark suspected I had discovered the truth about Sheila's death, my own life would be in immediate danger. I needed to be smarter, more careful, more strategic than I had ever been before. Because I wasn't just the babysitter anymore. I was the only person who could bring a killer to justice. The next morning, I watched Mark over breakfast as he played the role of devoted father, cutting Clay's pancakes and asking Anna about her upcoming science project. His performance was flawless. Warm smile, attentive questions, gentle teasing that made both children giggle. If I hadn't heard that recorded conversation, I would never have suspected that this loving father was capable of murder. But now I saw the calculation behind every gesture, the way his eyes remained cold even when he smiled, the slight tension in his shoulders that suggested a man constantly on guard. Mark Hartwell was a predator disguised as a protector, and his own children were living in the house with their mother's killer. "Olivia seems quiet this morning," Mark observed, those calculating eyes turning to me. "Everything all right?" "Just tired," I replied, maintaining the pleasant expression I'd perfected over 2 years of playing the invisible caregiver. Clay was up late with growing pains. It was a lie, but a believable one. Mark nodded, already losing interest as his phone buzzed with what was undoubtedly another crisis from Brian. My real education began that afternoon when both children were at school and Mark was locked away in his study for another urgent business call. I had roughly 3 hours before Anna and Clay returned, 3 hours to begin building a case that could put their father behind bars without destroying the children's lives in the process. My first advantage was one Mark had never considered.
My degree in child development had required extensive coursework in family law, including training on how to document evidence of child endangerment. I knew how investigations worked, what constituted admissible evidence, and most importantly, how to protect children caught in the crossfire of adult crimes. My second advantage was my near invisibility in Mark's world. After 2 years of treating me like furniture, he'd forgotten that furniture sometimes has ears. I'd overheard countless phone calls, seen documents left carelessly on his desk, witnessed meetings that he assumed I was too simple to understand. I started with digital evidence, using my laptop to create encrypted backups of everything I discovered. The recorded conversation between Mark and Brian went into a secure cloud storage account under a false name. Screenshots of the suspicious bank transfers, copies of the SEC investigation letter, even photos of the police report about Sheila's accident, everything was cataloged and hidden where Mark could never find it. But I needed more than just digital breadcrumbs. I needed physical evidence, witness testimony, and most crucially, I needed to understand the full scope of Mark's criminal network.
The opportunity came when Mark announced another business trip, this time to the Cayman Islands, where several of his shell companies were incorporated. He'd be gone for 5 days, long enough for me to conduct a thorough search of the house. "Take good care of my children," he said as his car pulled away, and the irony of those words wasn't lost on me. I was the only one who truly cared about Anna and Clay's welfare. That first night, after the children were asleep, I began my systematic search of Mark's private spaces. His home office yielded a treasure trove of evidence: offshore account statements hidden in a hollowed-out law book, correspondence with known money launderers, and, most damning of all, a detailed plan for faking his own death if the federal investigation got too close. The plan was meticulous and chilling. Mark intended to stage a boating accident during one of his Caribbean trips, disappear with millions in stolen money, and leave his children orphaned rather than face justice for his crimes. The cold calculation of abandoning Anna and Clay, children who had already lost their mother to his violence, revealed the true depth of his sociopathy. But it was in Sheila's old study, the room that had been locked since her death, that I found the evidence that would change everything. Using a hairpin to pick the simple lock, another skill from my surprisingly diverse background, I stepped into a shrine to the woman Mark had murdered. Sheila's desk remained exactly as she'd left it, computer still plugged in, coffee cup still sitting beside her keyboard with a ring of mold around the edges. When I powered up her computer, I discovered that Sheila had been conducting her own investigation into Mark's activities before her death. Email drafts addressed to the FBI detailed suspicious transfers she'd noticed. Bank statements were annotated in her careful handwriting, tracking money as it moved through various shell companies. Most importantly, she'd been in contact with a federal agent named Carol Blake who was already investigating Hartwell Industries. Agent Blake's business card was tucked into Sheila's desk calendar, along with a note in Sheila's handwriting. "Meeting scheduled for next week. Time to end this." That meeting had never happened because Sheila had died 3 days before it was supposed to take place. I photographed everything, but I also made another discovery that sent chills down my spine. Hidden behind a framed photo of the children was a small digital recorder, still containing the last conversation Sheila had recorded before her death. Her voice, trembling with fear but resolute with determination, filled the dark room. "If something happens to me, if this doesn't look like an accident, please protect my children. Mark is dangerous, more dangerous than anyone knows. He's capable of anything to protect his secrets. The children must never know what their father really is." The recording continued with specific details about Mark's crimes, locations of hidden evidence, and most heartbreaking of all, instructions for Anna and Clay's care if she didn't survive to expose him herself. "I've set aside money in an account only my lawyer knows about," Sheila's voice continued. "It's for the children's future, but also for whoever might need to take care of them if I'm gone. I pray it's not necessary, but if you're listening to this, then Mark has already won." As I sat in the darkness of Sheila's study, listening to a dead woman's final words, I realized that I wasn't just investigating Mark's crimes.
I was completing the work Sheila had started. She had died trying to protect her children from their father's evil, and now that responsibility had fallen to me. But unlike Sheila, I had advantages she hadn't possessed. I had 2 years of Mark's trust, access to his private spaces, and most importantly, I understood that he saw me as no threat whatsoever. Mark Hartwell had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the woman who loved his children more than he ever had. And now his own arrogance would become the weapon I used to destroy him. The morning after discovering Sheila's recording, I made contact with Agent Carol Blake. Using an encrypted messaging app, I sent a simple message. Sheila Hartwell was murdered. I have proof. Her response came within hours. Meet me at Riverside Park, North Entrance, 2 p.m. Come alone. Bring everything. Agent Blake was younger than I'd expected, perhaps in her early 40s, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of our surroundings as we sat on a bench overlooking the river. When I handed her the flash drive containing all of Sheila's evidence plus my own discoveries, her expression remained professionally neutral, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested this was bigger than even I had imagined. "How long have you suspected Mark Hartwell killed his wife?" she asked, her voice carefully modulated.
Only recently, but Agent Blake, there's something else. The children, they're not safe. Mark has a plan to disappear if the investigation gets too close. He intends to abandon them completely. We know, she said quietly. Mrs. Hartwell's investigation uncovered a network that extends far beyond her husband's company. Mark Hartwell is just one piece of a much larger operation involving offshore banking, political corruption, and what we believe are multiple murders disguised as accidents. The scope of it took my breath away. How many others? At least 6 that we can prove, including 2 other wives who discovered their husband's activities and died in convenient accidents, car crashes, drowning, even a suspicious home invasion. Agent Blake's jaw tightened. These men have turned killing their spouses into a standard business practice. And Brian Carson, Mark's partner? Carson is actually the one who brought this network to our attention. He's been cooperating with our investigation for months, feeding us information about the larger conspiracy. Mark doesn't know his best friend is the reason we're closing in. This revelation stunned me. Brian, who I'd assumed was Mark's co-conspirator, was actually working to bring him down. Then why did he threaten me? That conversation I overheard about making me a liability. Agent Blake's expression grew grim. Because Mark is becoming increasingly paranoid and dangerous. Brian is trying to protect you by making Mark think you're not a threat, but we're running out of time. Our sources indicate Mark is planning to accelerate his exit strategy. What does that mean? It means he's preparing to eliminate anyone who could connect him to his crimes before he disappears, including you, and potentially even his own children if he sees them as loose ends. The blood drained from my face. Anna and Clay, but they're his children. So was Ethan Morrison, age 9, whose father killed him along with his mother when she discovered the money laundering operation 2 years ago in Seattle. We couldn't prove it then, but we know now. These men are sociopaths, Miss Carson. Family means nothing to them compared to their own survival. That evening, I returned to the Hartwell estate with a new understanding of the danger we all faced. Mark had returned from his trip that afternoon, and I could sense the change in him immediately. His usual controlled demeanor had been replaced by something manic, his movements sharp and unpredictable as he paced through the house like a caged animal. "Daddy seems sad," Clay observed as I helped him with his homework at the kitchen table. "He's just stressed about work," I replied, though my attention was fixed on Mark's study, where another heated phone conversation was taking place. "Brian, you need to understand the stakes here," Mark's voice carried through the partly open door. "The walls are closing in. We need to implement Protocol 7 immediately." Protocol 7? That wasn't a term I'd heard before, but the urgency in Mark's voice suggested it was their contingency plan for when everything fell apart. "The children complicate things," Mark continued. "They're attached to the babysitter, and she's becoming too observant.
We might need to address both problems simultaneously. My blood turned to ice. Mark was planning to kill both me and his children. That night, as I tucked Anna and Clay into bed, I made a decision that would put everything in motion. I couldn't wait for Agent Blake's investigation to play out. Mark was moving too fast, becoming too dangerous. The children needed protection now, and I was the only one positioned to provide it. "Anna, Clay," I said softly, sitting on the edge of Anna's bed, "how would you feel about taking a little vacation, just the three of us?" "Like camping?" Clay asked excitedly. "Something like that. A place where we could be safe and have fun while Daddy handles some grown-up business." Anna, always more perceptive than her younger brother, studied my face carefully. "Are we in danger, Olivia?" I couldn't lie to her. These children had been through enough deception. "I think we might be, but I promise I'll keep you safe, no matter what happens." She nodded solemnly, then surprised me by taking my hand. "I trust you, Mom." The word hit me like a physical blow. Mom, not Olivia, not even the casual mama she sometimes used when she was hurt or scared. Mom. The title Sheila should have been there to hear, now given to the woman who had stepped in to love and protect her children. As I sat in the darkness of their room, watching them sleep peacefully for what might be the last time in their childhood home, I realized that everything had led to this moment. All the careful investigation, all the evidence gathering, all the strategic planning came down to one simple truth. I would do anything to protect these children, even if it meant going to war with their father.
Mark Hartwell had killed their mother to protect his secrets, but he had seriously underestimated the woman who had taken Sheila's place in their hearts. And tomorrow, that underestimation would begin to cost him everything. The next morning brought an unexpected opportunity when Mark announced he needed to fly to New York for an emergency board meeting. His agitation was palpable as he threw clothes into a suitcase, his phone constantly buzzing with calls from lawyers and federal investigators who were clearly tightening their net. "I'll be back Thursday," he said curtly, barely glancing at Anna and Clay as they ate their breakfast. "Keep the children on their normal schedule, Olivia. No disruptions." The irony of his words wasn't lost on me. He was ordering me to maintain normalcy while planning to destroy the very foundation of these children's lives. After his car disappeared down the driveway, I put my own plan into motion. My first call was to Agent Blake, using the secure phone she'd given me. "He's gone for 3 days," I reported. "I need to get the children somewhere safe before he returns." "We're not ready to move yet," Blake replied. "We need Mark to make the first move, something that gives us grounds for immediate arrest. If we act too soon, his lawyers will claim persecution and the whole case could collapse. And if we wait too long, those children could end up dead." There was a pause before Blake spoke again. "There is another option. We could arrange for you and the children to disappear temporarily while we build the final pieces of our case, witness protection-style safe house, until we can arrest Mark." It was tempting, but I knew it wasn't the right solution. Running would leave Mark free to destroy evidence, intimidate other witnesses, and potentially escape justice entirely. No, I needed a different approach, one that would force Mark to reveal his true nature in a way that couldn't be denied or covered up. That afternoon, while Anna and Clay were at school, I made a series of strategic phone calls. First, to Mark's mother, Sheila Blake Hartwell, the elderly woman who had never fully accepted her daughter-in-law's death as accidental. "Mrs. Hartwell, this is Olivia Carson, your son's nanny. I was wondering if you might like to visit with Anna and Clay this weekend. They miss their grandmother." Eleanor Hartwell's voice brightened immediately. "Oh, my dear, I would love that. I've been so worried about those precious children. Mark rarely lets me see them anymore." Perfect. Eleanor's presence would provide additional witnesses and protection for the children, while also giving me access to someone who knew Mark's history better than anyone. My second call was to Dr. James Popplewell, the children's pediatrician and family friend who had been Sheila's confidant before her death. I discovered his number in Sheila's contact list, along with a note indicating she'd shared some of her concerns with Mark with him.
Dr. Popplewell, I'm calling about Anna and Clay Hartwell. I'm concerned about some behavioral changes I've noticed, and I think they might benefit from a psychological evaluation. What kind of changes? His voice was immediately professional but concerned. Night terrors that seem related to their father's presence, regressive behavior when he returns from trips, and Anna has started asking questions about whether her mother's death was really an accident. There was a long silence before Dr. Popplewell spoke. Bring them in tomorrow morning. And Miss Carson, if you have concerns about their safety, I want you to know that I shared similar concerns with their mother before she died. My third call was the most dangerous, but potentially the most valuable. I contacted Sonny Morrison, the investigative journalist who had been following the string of suspicious spouse deaths that Agent Blake had mentioned. His articles had been instrumental in bringing federal attention to the pattern, though he'd never been able to prove the connection. Mr. Morrison, I have information about the Hartwell case that could break your investigation wide open, but I need guarantees about protecting the children involved. The Hartwell Industries CEO? We've been watching him for months. What kind of information? Recorded evidence of premeditated murder, financial documents proving money laundering, and most importantly, proof that he's planning to kill again to cover his tracks. Morrison's voice sharpened with interest. What do you need from me? I need you to be ready to publish everything simultaneously when I give you the signal. But more than that, I need you to help me create a situation where Mark reveals his true nature in a way that can't be covered up or explained away.
Over the next 2 days, I orchestrated what would become Mark's downfall with the precision of a symphony conductor. Eleanor Hartwell arrived on Wednesday evening, immediately noticing changes in the children that Mark had been too self-absorbed to see. Anna seems so fearful, she confided to me as we watched the children play in the backyard. And Clay keeps asking when his daddy is coming home, but not in an excited way, more like he's dreading it. They've been through a lot, I said carefully, losing their mother so young, and Mark's been under tremendous stress lately. Eleanor's eyes sharpened. What kind of stress? Business troubles, federal investigations, the kind of pressure that makes some men— I let the sentence hang, planting seeds of doubt in the mind of someone who had always suspected her son was capable of more than he appeared. Dr. Popplewell's evaluation of the children on Thursday morning provided exactly the professional documentation I needed. Both Anna and Clay showed signs of chronic anxiety related to their father's presence, and Anna's detailed drawings of the bad man who hurt mommy provided chilling insight into what the children had subconsciously understood about their mother's death. These children are living in a state of constant fear, Dr. Popplewell told me privately after the session. They need to be removed from whatever environment is causing this trauma. What if I told you that environment was their own father? His expression grew grave. Then I would say we need to act immediately to protect them, regardless of the legal complications. By Thursday evening, all the pieces were in place. Eleanor Hartwell was staying in the house as a witness to whatever might unfold. Dr. Popplewell had filed a formal report with Child Protective Services, expressing concerns about the children's welfare. Agent Blake had federal marshals positioned nearby, ready to move at a moment's notice. And Sonny Morrison had a story ready to publish that would expose not just Mark, but the entire network of killers he was part of. Mark's return was scheduled for Friday morning, and I knew from his increasingly frantic phone calls that he was coming home to implement his final solution, eliminating everyone who could connect him to his crimes. What he didn't know was that his simple babysitter had spent the last week building a trap that would expose him as the monster he truly was, in front of witnesses who could never be silenced or intimidated. The stage was set for a confrontation that would finally give Sheila Hartwell the justice she deserved and ensure that Anna and Clay would never again have to live in fear of the man who had killed their mother. Friday morning arrived with deceptive calm. I prepared the children's breakfast as I had countless times before, helped Anna choose her outfit for school, and listened to Clay practice his spelling words. To anyone watching, it looked like another ordinary day in the Hartwell household. But beneath the surface, I was a coiled spring, every nerve ending alert for the sound of Mark's car in the driveway. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, ostensibly reading her morning paper, but I caught her watching me with curious intensity.
She was an intelligent woman who had raised a sociopath without realizing it, and I could see her beginning to piece together the subtle signs that something was very wrong in her son's perfect life. "You seem tense today, dear," she observed as I wiped down already clean counters for the third time. "Mark's coming home," I replied simply, and the way I said it made Eleanor's eyebrows rise slightly. "That's usually a good thing in most households," she said carefully. I met her eyes directly. In most households, the father doesn't plan to murder his children's caregiver. The newspaper crumpled in Eleanor's hands. "What did you just say?" Before I could respond, the sound of tires on gravel announced Mark's return. Through the kitchen window, I watched him emerge from his black Mercedes, his movements sharp and predatory. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes scanned the property like a man preparing for battle. "Eleanor," I said quietly, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "in about 10 minutes, you're going to see your son's true nature. I need you to remember that the children upstairs are innocent in all of this, and they're going to need their grandmother's protection." She started to protest, but the front door slammed open with enough force to rattle the windows. Mark's voice echoed through the house, sharp with barely controlled rage. "Olivia, where are you?" I walked calmly to the foyer, leaving Eleanor in the kitchen, but knowing she would be able to hear every word. Mark stood in the entryway, his expensive suit wrinkled from travel, his face flushed with an anger that made him almost unrecognizable. "Welcome home," I said pleasantly. "How was your trip?"
"Cut the act," he snarled. "I know what you've been doing. Brian told me about your little meeting with the federal agents." So Brian had finally revealed his true allegiance. Good. That meant Mark was operating without his usual safety nets, making him more likely to make the kind of mistakes that would destroy him. "I'm not sure what you mean," I replied, maintaining my calm exterior, while my hand moved slowly toward the small recording device hidden in my pocket. Agent Blake had insisted I wear it, and now I was grateful for her foresight. "Don't play dumb with me." Mark stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Sneaking around my house, going through my private papers, talking to people who have no business knowing my affairs." "I've been taking care of your children, Mark, the same thing I've done every day for the past 2 years. "My children," he repeated, his eyes blazing. "Let me remind you of something, Olivia. You are nothing to those kids. Nothing. You're hired help, a babysitter, and when hired help becomes a problem, it gets eliminated." The recording device captured every threatening word, but I needed more. I needed him to confess to Sheila's murder, to reveal his plans for the children, to say something so damning that no lawyer could explain it away. "The way you eliminated Sheila?" I asked quietly. Mark's face went completely still, and for a moment I thought I had pushed too far too fast. Then his expression shifted into something cold and calculating that made my blood freeze. "Sheila was a problem that needed solving," he said, his voice eerily calm. "She couldn't understand that some things are bigger than individual morality. She threatened everything I'd built, everything that provided for this family." "So you killed her?" "I solved a problem." Mark's smile was terrifying in its complete lack of warmth. "Just like I'm going to solve you." From the kitchen doorway came a sharp gasp. Eleanor had heard every word, her face pale with shock and horror as she stared at the son she thought she knew. "Mark," she whispered, her voice breaking. "How could you?" Mark spun around, and I saw the exact moment he realized that his mother had witnessed his confession. His careful mask slipped completely, revealing the soulless predator beneath. "Mother," he said, his voice taking on a false warmth that somehow made it even more chilling. "You shouldn't be here for this." "For what?" Eleanor demanded, stepping fully into the foyer. "What are you planning to do to this girl?"
What I have to do, Mark replied. What I should have done weeks ago when she started getting too curious about things that don't concern her. I could see him calculating, weighing his options. One federal informant and one elderly woman stood between him and his escape plan. In his twisted mind, the solution was probably simple. "Where are Anna and Clay?" he asked suddenly, his tone shifting to something more dangerous. "At school," I lied, though they were actually upstairs in Clay's room, hidden in the secret playhouse we'd built in his closet. Agent Blake's people were monitoring the situation, but I needed to keep Mark talking until they could move in safely. "Good," Mark said, and the relief in his voice told me everything I needed to know about his plans for his own children. He reached into his jacket, and I caught the glint of metal. A gun. Mark had come home prepared to commit murder, and the recording device in my pocket was capturing every second of his descent into complete madness. But as I stared into the eyes of a man who had killed his wife and was prepared to kill again, I felt something unexpected. Not fear, but a cold, calculating rage. This monster had destroyed Sheila's life, traumatized her children, and threatened everyone who dared to love them. Mark Hartwell had underestimated me for the last time. "You're right about one thing, Mark," I said, my voice steady as steel. "I am just the babysitter, but you forgot something important about babysitters." "What's that?" he sneered, his finger moving toward the trigger. "We protect our children, no matter what." The sound of sirens in the distance made Mark's head snap toward the window, his carefully controlled demeanor finally cracking completely. Through the sheer curtains, federal vehicles were visible approaching the estate, their lights flashing like harbingers of justice. "You called them," he snarled, the gun wavering in his hand as panic began to override his calculated coldness. "I didn't need to," I replied calmly. "Agent Blake has been monitoring this house for weeks. Every conversation, every threat, every move you've made has been documented." Mark's face contorted with rage and desperation. "You think this is over? You think arresting me solves anything? I have connections, lawyers, offshore accounts they'll never touch. I'll be out in months, and when I am—"
When you are, Anna and Clay will be safe with people who actually love them, Eleanor interrupted, her voice trembling with a grandmother's fury. "You'll never touch those children again." The federal agents were at the front door now, their authoritative knocks echoing through the house. But Mark wasn't finished. With the desperate cunning of a cornered animal, he moved toward the staircase where his children were hidden. "Anna, Clay," he shouted up the stairs. "Come down here right now." My heart stopped. If the children appeared, Mark would use them as human shields, traumatizing them further and potentially putting their lives at risk. But Anna and Clay had been through enough terror, they didn't need to see their father arrested at gunpoint. "They're not coming down," I said firmly, positioning myself between Mark and the staircase. "Get out of my way, Olivia. They're my children." "No," I said, and the word carried 2 years of suppressed anger, months of careful planning, and the protective instincts of a woman who had become these children's true mother. "They're not." Mark raised the gun, pointing it directly at my chest. I said, "Move, Mr. Hartwell." Agent Blake's voice boomed through the door. "This is the FBI. Open the door immediately." In that moment, suspended between a killer's weapon and federal agents' demands, I made a choice that would define everything that came after. Instead of moving aside or cowering in fear, I took a step closer to Mark. "You want to know what Anna told me last week?" I said conversationally, as if we were discussing the weather instead of facing a life or death standoff. "She said she has dreams about her mommy. Not nightmares, dreams where Sheila comes to visit her and tells her that the bad man who hurt mommy will go away soon." Mark's hand tightened on the gun, but something in my tone made him hesitate. "And Clay," I continued, taking another small step forward. "He's been drawing pictures of his new family. Want to know who's in them? Me, him, Anna, and his mommy watching from heaven. No daddy in sight. It's like his subconscious knows exactly what you are. Shut up, Mark hissed, but his voice cracked slightly. They don't love you, Mark. They're afraid of you. They have been since they were old enough to sense that something was wrong with their father. The only reason they haven't said anything is because they're children, and children are programmed to love their parents even when those parents don't deserve it. Eleanor was crying silently in the doorway, her hands pressed to her mouth as she watched her son reveal himself completely. The FBI agents were working on the front door, but I knew they were being careful not to escalate the situation while civilians were in danger. But you know what the beautiful thing is about children, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. They recognize real love when they see it. They know the difference between someone who cares for them and someone who views them as possessions. That's why Anna calls me mom now. That's why Clay asks me to sing him to sleep instead of you. That's why they both feel safer when you're traveling than when you're home. I gave them everything, Mark shouted, his composure finally shattering completely. This house, their school, their clothes, their future. You gave them things, I replied. I gave them love. There's a difference. The front door splintered open, and Agent Blake led a team of federal marshals into the foyer, their weapons drawn and trained on Mark. But instead of surrendering, he pressed the gun harder against my ribs, using me as a shield between himself and the agents. Everyone back, he screamed. I'll kill her. I'll kill the babysitter. And then I'll kill my ungrateful children. The words hung in the air like a poison cloud, and I saw Agent Blake's expression shift from professional concern to personal rage. She had children of her own, and the idea of a father threatening his kids' lives clearly struck her at a visceral level. Mr. Hartwell, she said, her voice deadly calm, you're surrounded. There's nowhere to run. Let Miss Carson go, and we can discuss terms. The only terms I want are safe passage to my plane and 12 hours before you come after me. Mark snarled. Otherwise, the babysitter dies, and then I go upstairs to get my children. But I had one more card to play, one final revelation that would destroy Mark's last shred of control, and ensure he could never hurt Anna and Clay again. Tell them about the insurance policy, Mark, I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. Mark's grip on the gun faltered slightly. What? The life insurance policy you took out on me 3 months ago, $500,000, with you as the beneficiary. The same amount you collected when Sheila died. Tell Agent Blake how you've been planning my death since Christmas, just like you planned your wife's.
The color drained from Mark's face as he realized I had uncovered even that final secret. Around the room, federal agents exchanged glances that confirmed they were now dealing with not just a desperate criminal, but a serial killer who had been methodically planning multiple murders. "You think you're so smart," Mark whispered, his voice filled with venomous hatred. "But you're forgetting one thing, Olivia. You're just the babysitter, and babysitters are replaceable." He pulled the trigger. The gunshot exploded through the foyer like thunder, but instead of searing pain, I felt Mark's body jerk against mine as Agent Blake's shot found its mark first. His weapon clattered to the marble floor as he crumpled, clutching his shoulder, his face contorted with pain and disbelief. "Suspect down," Blake shouted as federal agents swarmed around us. "Medic needed." In the chaos that followed, my legs gave out from shock and adrenaline. Eleanor rushed to my side, her arms wrapping around me as I shook uncontrollably, the reality of how close I'd come to death finally hitting me. "It's over," she whispered, her own voice trembling. "Oh, my dear girl, it's over." But even as paramedics worked on Mark's wound and agents secured the scene, I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. From upstairs came the sound of small feet running and Anna's voice calling out in terror. "Olivia! Olivia, where are you?" "I'm here," I called back, finding my voice despite the chaos. "Stay upstairs, sweetheart. Everything's okay." But Anna appeared at the top of the staircase anyway, Clay close behind her, both children's faces pale with fear. They took in the scene below. their father bleeding on the floor, strangers with guns, their grandmother crying, and me sitting against the wall trying to catch my breath. "Is Daddy hurt?" Clay asked in a small voice. The question broke my heart because despite everything Mark had done, despite the danger he'd posed to their lives, he was still their father in their innocent minds. They didn't understand the full scope of his crimes, the depth of his evil, or how close they'd come to losing everything. "Your daddy made some very bad choices," I said carefully, standing on shaky legs to go to them. "The police are here to make sure everyone is safe now." Agent Blake approached us, her expression gentling as she looked at the children. "Anna, Clay, my name is Carol. I'm a police officer. Can you come downstairs with Olivia so we can talk?" As we gathered in the living room, the same room where I'd first met these broken children 2 years ago, Agent Blake explained the situation in terms they could understand. Their father had done things that hurt people, including their mother. He would have to go away for a very long time to make up for those things. "What about us?" Anna asked, her voice barely audible. "Where will we live?" It was the question I'd been dreading, the one that would determine whether my 2 years of love and protection would end in heartbreak. Legally, Mark was their father and guardian. His arrest didn't automatically transfer custody to me, despite the bond we'd formed. "That's something we'll need to work out," Agent Blake said carefully, "but I want you to know that Olivia isn't going anywhere unless you want her to." Eleanor spoke up then, her voice stronger than it had been all morning. "I'd like to apply for emergency custody of my grandchildren," she said, "and I'd like to formally request that Olivia continue as their primary caregiver." The words hit me like a physical blow. Eleanor wasn't trying to separate me from Anna and Clay. She was trying to keep us together. "Grandma Eleanor," Anna said suddenly, "can Olivia be our mom now, for real?" The innocence of the question, asked in a room still echoing with gunshots and sirens, crystallized everything that had led to this moment. These children had lost their biological mother to murder and their father to his own evil choices. But in the midst of that loss, they had found something precious, a love that wasn't based on blood or obligation, but on choice and commitment. "We'll see what we can arrange," Eleanor said softly, tears streaming down her face. Over the next several hours, as crime scene investigators processed evidence and social workers conducted interviews, the full scope of Mark's crimes became clear. The insurance policy on my life was just one piece of an elaborate murder plot that would have eliminated me, disappeared the children, and allowed Mark to start fresh with a new identity in a non-extradition country. But perhaps the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Brian Carson, who had been recording his conversations with Mark for months at Agent Blake's request. The recordings revealed not just the plot against me and the children, but detailed confessions about Sheila's murder and the broader network of spouse killings that Mark had been part of. "He never saw it coming," Brian told me quietly as we watched Mark being loaded into an ambulance under heavy guard. He was so convinced of his own superiority, so certain that everyone around him was too stupid to threaten him. He never realized that his best friend had been working to bring him down for over a year. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you help them?" Brian's face was haunted as he looked toward the house where Anna and Clay were being interviewed by gentle social workers. "Because I have kids too, and because Sheila was my friend before she was Mark's wife. She deserved justice." As evening fell and the last of the investigators packed up their equipment, I found myself alone with Anna and Clay in their bedroom. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and custody hearings and formal proceedings that would determine their future. But tonight, they just needed their mother. Not their biological mother, but the woman who had chosen to love them when their world fell apart. "Are you really going to stay with us?" Clay asked as I tucked him in. "For as long as you want me," I promised. "Forever?" Anna pressed. "Forever." It was a promise I could make with complete confidence now, because I understood something that Mark never had. Real family isn't about blood or legal documents or social expectations. It's about showing up, day after day, choosing love over convenience, protection over self-interest, and staying even when staying is difficult. Mark Hartwell had dismissed me as just the babysitter, never realizing that babysitters often become the people who love children most fiercely because we choose them just as deliberately as they choose us. And in 3 months at his sentencing hearing, Anna and Clay would stand before a judge and ask if they could officially change their last name to Carson, not because they wanted to forget their mother, but because they wanted to belong to the woman who had saved their lives in every way that mattered. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The real reckoning, the moment when Mark's dismissive words would come back to haunt him in the most devastating way possible, wouldn't come for another 8 months. Because while federal prosecutors built their case against him, while he sat in a maximum security prison awaiting trial, and while his lawyers desperately tried to construct a defense for the indefensible, Mark Hartwell had no idea that his greatest humiliation was yet to come. The custody hearing took place 6 weeks after his arrest, in a sterile family courtroom that smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams. Mark appeared via video link from prison, his expensive suits replaced by orange cotton, his polished confidence eroded by months of legal defeats and mounting evidence. Judge Patricia Popplewell, no relation to Dr. Popplewell, though the coincidence wasn't lost on me, reviewed the case with the methodical precision of someone who had seen too many children victimized by the adults who should have protected them. Mr. Hartwell, she said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, you stand accused of murdering your wife, attempting to murder your children's caregiver, and planning to kill your own children to facilitate your escape from justice. Do you have anything to say regarding custody of Anna and Clay Hartwell? Mark's image flickered on the courtroom monitor, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. Your Honor, these are my children. Whatever mistakes I may have made, they belong with their father. The casual dismissal of multiple murders as mistakes sent a ripple of disgust through the courtroom, but it was Anna's response that truly revealed how completely Mark had misunderstood his own children. We don't want to belong to him, she said, her 9-year-old voice clear and strong as she stood beside the court advocate. Mom? Judge Popplewell asked gently, though she clearly understood who Anna meant. Olivia, Clay chimed in, his 7-year-old logic cutting through legal complexities with devastating simplicity. She's our real mom, the one who takes care of us and loves us and doesn't try to hurt people. Mark's face on the monitor contorted with fury. She's the babysitter. She's hired help. These children have been brainwashed against their own father. Mr. Hartwell, Judge Popplewell said coldly, the evidence suggests that if anyone was damaged by their relationship with you, it was because you exposed them to violence, trauma, and the constant fear that they might lose another parent to your criminal activities. The formal custody transfer to Eleanor, with me as the children's primary guardian, was a foregone conclusion. But the real blow to Mark's ego came when the judge asked Anna and Clay if they had any final statements.
Anna stepped forward, her small hands folded with the composure of someone far older than her years. I want to tell my father that we forgive him for hurting Mommy because Mommy would want us to forgive. But we don't want to see him anymore because Olivia, taught us that we don't have to keep people in our lives who make us scared. Mark's lawyer frantically tried to object, but Clay wasn't finished. And we want to tell the judge that Olivia is the best mom in the whole world, even better than the moms on TV, because she stayed with us when everyone else left. The custody hearing made local news, then national news, and finally international headlines as the full scope of Mark's crimes became public. Children choose love over blood, read one headline. The babysitter who became a hero, proclaimed another. But the media attention, while validating, was nothing compared to the quiet satisfaction of our new daily routine.
Anna excelled in her new school, her natural intelligence finally free to flourish without the constant undercurrent of fear. Clay's stutter, a nervous tic that had developed after his mother's death, disappeared entirely as his sense of security solidified. Eleanor proved to be not just a devoted grandmother, but a trusted ally in creating the stable, loving environment the children needed. She sold the Hartwell estate, too many bad memories, she said, and bought a modest but comfortable house in a neighborhood filled with families and laughter. The house had a large backyard where Clay could play with his dinosaur collection, a reading nook where Anna could lose herself in books, and a kitchen where the 3 generations of our chosen family could gather for meals that were chaotic, loving, and completely normal. It was in that kitchen, on a snowy December evening, nearly a year after Mark's arrest, that Anna made an announcement that would set the final act of our story in motion. "Mom," she said, and by then she called me Mom without hesitation or explanation, "I want to visit Daddy in prison." I nearly dropped the casserole I was removing from the oven. "Anna, sweetheart, why?" "Because I want to tell him something," she said simply. "And I want him to see who we are now. I want him to see that we're happy without him." Clay looked up from his homework. "Can I come too? I want to show him my science project about families. I drew our family, you, me, Anna, and Grandma Eleanor, and I wrote about how families are people who choose to love each other." The irony was perfect and terrible. Mark, who had dismissed me as just the babysitter, was about to face the children he'd claimed as possessions, only to learn that they had willingly, joyfully, completely chosen the woman he'd tried to eliminate. But there was one more twist coming, one final revelation that would make his humiliation complete. Because Mark Hartwell was dying. The call came from Mark's defense attorney on a Tuesday morning in January, nearly 14 months after his arrest. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, diagnosed during a routine medical exam. 6 months to live, maybe less. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had killed his wife and planned to kill his children and me was now facing his own mortality. "He's requesting a final visit with Anna and Clay," the lawyer explained over the phone. "He wants to make amends, I suppose, try to repair his relationship with his children before." I understood what he couldn't say. Mark was dying, and even monsters wanted to believe they could be forgiven by the people they'd hurt most. "I'll discuss it with the children," I said, though I already knew what their answer would be. Anna and Clay had been asking about visiting their father for months, not out of lingering love, but from a mature understanding that closure sometimes required confrontation. The maximum security prison was a fortress of concrete and razor wire, a place designed to contain society's most dangerous criminals. As we passed through multiple security checkpoints, I watched Anna and Clay carefully, looking for signs of fear or regret. Instead, I saw determination in Anna's set jaw and quiet curiosity in Clay's observant eyes. They had insisted on wearing their best clothes for this visit. Anna in a blue dress that brought out her eyes, Clay in a button-down shirt and khakis. They looked like the healthy, happy, well-loved children they had become, and I realized that their appearance was itself a kind of weapon against the man who had tried to destroy their lives. Mark was waiting for us in the visitor's room, handcuffed to his wheelchair, the orange jumpsuit hanging loose on his shrunken frame. Cancer had ravaged his body with an efficiency that even his own violence couldn't match. His once commanding presence had been reduced to something fragile and desperate.
But his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, remained unchanged. They fixed on me with undimmed hatred before moving to his children with what might have been genuine emotion. It was impossible to tell if what I saw there was love or simply the possessive instinct of a man who viewed his offspring as property. "Anna, Clay," he said, his voice raspy but still carrying traces of his old authority. "You've grown so much." Anna sat down across from him with the poise of a 10-year-old who had learned early that adults couldn't always be trusted. "Hello, Daddy." Clay remained standing,
his small hand finding mine as he studied the stranger their father had become. "You look different," he observed with a child's brutal honesty. "I'm sick," Mark admitted. "Very sick. That's why I wanted to see you both. I wanted to tell you that I love you." "Do you?" Anna asked, her head tilted with genuine curiosity. "Because Olivia explained to us what love really means. Love means you want the other person to be happy and safe, even if it makes things harder for you. Love means you protect people, not hurt them." Mark's jaw tightened. "Olivia has filled your heads with lies about me." "Actually," Clay said, his 7-year-old voice carrying surprising strength, "Mom never talks about you at all unless we ask questions. She says some things are too sad and complicated for kids to understand, but that it's not our fault you made bad choices." The casual way Clay called me Mom hit Mark like a physical blow. His hands clenched into fists despite the handcuffs, and I saw the flash of rage that had once made him so dangerous. "She's not your mother," he said through gritted teeth. "She's the babysitter. I hired her to watch you while I worked. She's nothing to this family." "She's everything to our family," Anna replied with the matter-of-fact certainty that only children possess. "She's the one who sang to us when we had nightmares. She's the one who helped us with homework and made us Halloween costumes and taught us how to ride bikes. She's the one who stayed when everyone else left." "I never left," Mark protested. "I was working to provide for you." "You left in your heart," Clay said simply. "Mom says sometimes people can be right next to you, but still be gone inside. That's what you were like before you went to prison. Gone inside." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but the real damage had been done in those first few exchanges. Anna and Clay didn't hate their father. They had moved beyond hatred into something far more devastating: indifference mixed with pity. They spoke to him like they might speak to a distant relative they barely remembered, polite but disconnected. When visiting time ended, Anna stood and looked directly into Mark's eyes. "Daddy, I want you to know that we're happy now. Really, truly happy. We have a mom who loves us, and a grandma who takes care of us, and friends at school, and everything we need. I want you to be happy too," Clay added, with the generosity of spirit that I'd worked so hard to nurture in him. "But we can't be the ones to make you happy. We're just kids." As we prepared to leave, Mark made one final desperate attempt to reassert his control. "This isn't over," he said, his voice carrying echoes of his old menace despite his physical weakness. "I'm still their father. I still have rights." Anna paused at the door and looked back at him with something that might have been pity. "You're not our daddy anymore," she said quietly. "You're just the man who used to live in our house before Mom came to save us." The walk back to the car was silent, both children processing what they'd experienced. It wasn't until we were driving away from the prison that Clay spoke up from the back seat. "Mom, he looked really sad." "Yes, he did." "Do you think he's sorry for the bad things he did?" I considered the question carefully, knowing that my answer would shape how Anna and Clay remembered this day. "I think he's sorry that he's sick and alone, but being sorry for consequences isn't the same as being sorry for choices." Anna nodded sagely. "He's not sorry he hurt people. He's just sorry he got caught." In the rearview mirror, I could see the prison growing smaller behind us, and I knew that this visit had accomplished something important. Anna and Clay had seen their father not as the powerful, terrifying figure from their nightmares, but as a broken man facing the consequences of his own evil choices. They had chosen, once and for all, where their loyalty belonged. But Mark Hartwell's story wasn't over yet. He had one final act of cruelty left in him, one last attempt to hurt the children who had rejected him and the one who had replaced him in their hearts. He was planning to make his death itself into a weapon against us. The first sign that Mark was orchestrating something came 3 weeks after our prison visit, when his lawyer called to inform me that Mark had amended his will. Despite his conviction and the asset forfeiture that had accompanied it, He still retained some personal effects and a small trust fund that had been protected from seizure. All of it was being left to Anna and Clay, but with conditions that made my blood run cold. He's stipulating that the inheritance can only be claimed if the children attend his funeral and participate in the eulogy, the lawyer explained reluctantly. Furthermore, he's designated specific individuals to serve as their guardians if anything happens to you or Mrs. Hartwell. The designated guardians were his business associates, men who were either under federal investigation themselves or who owed Mark favors that transcended his imprisonment. It was a transparent attempt to use his death to manipulate the children one final time, to force them into a public display of grief and filial loyalty that would rewrite the narrative of his crimes. And if they don't comply? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The inheritance goes to a foundation he's established, a foundation that, according to the paperwork, is dedicated to protecting children from unstable caregivers and inappropriate attachments to non-family members. Even from his deathbed, Mark was trying to paint me as the villain in his children's story. But the will was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, as Mark's condition deteriorated, a carefully orchestrated campaign began to emerge. Articles appeared in local newspapers questioning the controversial custody arrangement that had given guardianship to a former domestic employee. Social media accounts linked to Mark's remaining allies spread stories about how the children had been brainwashed against their loving father by a manipulative caregiver with her own agenda. The character assassination was subtle but persistent, designed to plant seeds of doubt about my motives and my fitness as a guardian. Mark was using his dying months to construct a narrative that would outlive him, one that portrayed him as a flawed but loving father who had been destroyed by a scheming outsider. He's building a case for post-mortem custody challenges, Eleanor said grimly as we reviewed the latest round of newspaper articles. Even if we retain custody, he's trying to ensure that Anna and Clay grow up questioning whether they made the right choice. The psychological warfare reached its peak when Mark's supporters began sending gifts to the children, toys, clothes, and books that arrived with notes claiming to be from people who knew your daddy before the lies started. Each package was a reminder that there were adults in the world who believed Mark's version of events, who saw me as the destroyer of their family rather than its savior. Anna, now 10 and far more perceptive than any child should have to be, recognized the manipulation for what it was. "They want us to feel guilty," she told me one evening as we sorted through another box of unwanted presents. "They want us to think we're bad kids for not loving Daddy." Clay, at 8, was more vulnerable to the emotional manipulation. I found him crying in his room one night, clutching a teddy bear that had arrived with a note claiming it was from Daddy's friend who remembers when you were born. "What if they're right?" he whispered as I held him. "What if I'm supposed to love Daddy even though he was mean? What if I'm a bad son?" The question broke my heart because it revealed exactly what Mark had been trying to achieve. Even from prison, even dying of cancer, he was still finding ways to hurt his children, to make them doubt themselves and the love they'd found with me. "Clay," I said gently, settling him on my lap the way I had when he was smaller, and the world seemed too big and frightening. "Love isn't something you owe people because they're related to you. Love is something you feel when someone makes you feel safe and happy and cared for." "But he's my real daddy," Clay said, echoing the words that had undoubtedly been planted in the gifts and messages. "Being someone's biological father doesn't make you their real daddy," I replied. "Being a real daddy means showing up every day, protecting your children, putting their needs before your own. Mark wasn't a real daddy to you and Anna. He was just the man who helped create you." "Are you our real mom, then?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with legal implications and emotional weight that a child couldn't fully understand. But Clay deserved honesty, especially when others were trying to confuse him with manipulation. "I'm the mom who chose you," I said finally, "and you're the children who chose me. That makes us a real family.
Mark's health declined rapidly as spring turned to summer. The prison medical facility couldn't provide the care he needed, and his lawyers petitioned for compassionate release to spend his final weeks in a hospice. The request was denied. The judge cited the severity of his crimes and the ongoing risk he posed to potential witnesses. When the call came in late July, I was prepared. Mark Hartwell had died in the prison medical ward, alone, except for the guards required to monitor high-security inmates. No family members had been present, no friends had come to say goodbye. The man who had commanded boardrooms and manipulated millions of dollars had died as isolated as his victims had been in their final moments. The funeral, however, would be anything but private. Mark's remaining supporters had organized a public memorial service, complete with media coverage and speeches about his contributions to the community and his devotion to his children. It was designed to be his final manipulation, his last chance to control the narrative of his life and death. And according to his will, Anna and Clay's inheritance depended on their participation in this grotesque theater. But Mark had made one crucial miscalculation. He had assumed that his children were still the traumatized, vulnerable victims he had left behind when he was arrested. He had no idea that they had grown into strong, confident young people who understood the difference between honoring the dead and participating in lies. The funeral would indeed be Mark's final moment of reckoning, but not in the way he had planned. The memorial service was held at St. Andrew's Cathedral, the same church where Mark and Sheila had been married 12 years earlier. The irony of celebrating a murderer's life in the same sanctuary where he had promised to love and cherish his victim wasn't lost on anyone who knew the truth. The organizers had pulled out all the stops: white lilies and elaborate floral arrangements, a string quartet playing somber classical pieces, and a guest list that read like a who's who of the business community. Mark's remaining allies had clearly invested significant resources in creating a spectacle that would rehabilitate his reputation and pressure his children into public forgiveness. Eleanor, Anna, Clay, and I arrived precisely on time, dressed in formal black attire that spoke of respect for the occasion, if not for the deceased. The children had insisted on attending despite my offers to shield them from what promised to be an uncomfortable experience. "We need to be there," Anna had explained with the wisdom of someone far older than her 10 years. "Not for him, but for us. We need to see the end of this story." The cathedral was packed with mourners who fell into distinct categories: genuine friends who remembered Mark from before his crimes were exposed, business associates who felt obligated to pay their respects, and curiosity seekers drawn by the scandal. The media presence was overwhelming, with cameras capturing every moment for the evening news and morning papers. We took our designated seats in the front row, the position reserved for immediate family. The symbolic weight of our placement wasn't lost on anyone: Anna and Clay, the children Mark had been willing to kill, sitting in the places of honor at his funeral. The service began with remarks from Reverend Blake, who struggled visibly with the task of eulogizing a man whose crimes had shocked the community. He spoke carefully about redemption and forgiveness, about the complexity of human nature and the tragedy of lives destroyed by poor choices. Then came the business associates, each one delivering carefully crafted speeches that painted Mark as a misunderstood visionary, a devoted father who had made mistakes but who had loved his children above all else. The revisionist history was nauseating but predictable, an attempt to transform a convicted murderer into a tragic figure worthy of sympathy. Throughout it all, Anna and Clay sat with perfect composure, their faces masks of polite attention that revealed nothing of their inner thoughts. They had learned from masters of deception after all, and they knew how to present the face the world expected to see. The moment of truth came when the Reverend announced that Mark's children would be sharing their memories of their father. According to the funeral program that Mark's supporters had distributed, Anna and Clay were scheduled to deliver a joint eulogy celebrating their father's life and expressing their love for him. Anna stood first, walking to the podium with the confident bearing of someone who had something important to say. The cathedral fell silent as she adjusted the microphone and looked out over the assembled crowd. "My name is Anna Carson," she began, and the use of my surname rather than Hartwell sent a ripple of murmurs through the congregation.
and this is my brother Clay Carson.
Clay joined her at the podium, his 8-year-old frame barely tall enough to reach the microphone, but his presence adding weight to whatever Anna was about to say. "We're here today because the man who helped create us is dead," Anna continued, her clear voice carrying to every corner of the cathedral. "Some of you knew Mark Hartwell as a businessman or a friend. We knew him as the man who killed our mother." The gasps and exclamations that erupted from the crowd were immediate and explosive. Several people started to stand, as if to object or leave, but Anna's next words froze them in place. "Some of you might think it's wrong for children to speak badly about their father at his funeral, but we're not here to speak badly about anyone. We're here to tell the truth." Clay stepped closer to the microphone, his young voice trembling but determined. "Our real mom is sitting in the front row. Her name is Olivia Carson, and she's the one who saved us when our father tried to hurt us. She's the one who loves us and takes care of us and makes us feel safe." "Our father called her just the babysitter," Anna added, her voice growing stronger with each word. "He thought that meant she didn't matter, that we didn't really love her. But he was wrong about everything." The cathedral was in chaos now, with people shouting, cameras flashing, and Mark's supporters trying desperately to regain control of the situation. But Anna and Clay weren't finished. "We want everyone to know that we chose our mom," Anna said, her voice rising above the commotion. "And she chose us. That's what real families do. They choose each other." "We forgive our father for the bad things he did," Clay added, his childish lisp making the words even more powerful. "But we don't miss him. We're happy now, and we want everyone to know that." The two children stood together at the podium for a moment longer, letting their words sink in before walking calmly back to their seats. The cathedral erupted in complete pandemonium, shouting, arguing, people streaming toward the exits in outrage or embarrassment. Through it all, I sat frozen in my seat, tears streaming down my face as I realized what Anna and Clay had just accomplished. They had turned Mark's final manipulation into their own declaration of independence, using his funeral as the stage for their most powerful rejection of his attempts to control them. Mark had planned for his death to be a weapon against us, a way to force his children into a public display of love and grief that would rewrite his legacy. Instead, Anna and Clay had used the moment to publicly, definitively, and completely choose the life they wanted over the one he had tried to impose on them. The inheritance Mark had tried to use as leverage suddenly seemed meaningless compared to the freedom his children had just claimed for themselves. The aftermath of Anna and Clay's funeral speech was immediate and far-reaching. By evening, video clips of their remarkable words had gone viral across social media platforms. Children exposed dead father's crimes at his own funeral became the top trending story, with millions of views and thousands of comments from people around the world who were moved by their courage. The legal ramifications were swift and decisive. Mark's carefully crafted will, with its manipulative conditions and designated guardians, was challenged successfully by our legal team. A judge ruled that any inheritance clauses designed to coerce minor children into public performances were unenforceable and contrary to their best interests. The deceased's attempt to control his children's expressions of grief from beyond the grave constitutes a form of post-mortem emotional abuse, Judge Popplewell wrote in her ruling. This court will not enforce conditions that prioritize a dead man's ego over living children's welfare. The financial impact extended far beyond Mark's personal estate. Hartwell Industries, already struggling under the weight of federal sanctions and criminal investigations, saw its remaining value evaporate overnight as clients and partners rushed to distance themselves from the scandal. The company that Mark had built from nothing, that he had been so desperate to protect through murder and manipulation, ceased to exist within 6 months of his death. But perhaps the most significant consequence was the effect on other families trapped in similar situations. Agent Carol Blake called me 3 days after the funeral with news that changed everything. 5 women have come forward in the past 48 hours, she reported, wives of Mark's business associates who witnessed their children's speech and decided they couldn't silence anymore about their own situations.
The network of abusive men that Mark had been part of began crumbling as their victims found the courage to speak out. The children's public rejection of their murderous father had given other survivors permission to reject their own abusers, regardless of family ties or social expectations. Dr. Popplewell, who had been quietly documenting concerning patterns among children from certain affluent families, found himself at the center of a massive investigation into systematic child endangerment within Mark's social circle. The pediatrician who had first recognized Anna and Clay's trauma became instrumental in identifying and protecting other children who were being victimized by their own parents' criminal activities. What your children did, he told me during one of our follow-up meetings, didn't just save themselves. It saved dozens of other children who were suffering in silence. The media attention, while overwhelming at times, also brought unexpected opportunities for healing and advocacy. Anna, who had always been academically gifted, began writing letters to other children in foster care or difficult family situations. Her words, wise beyond her years, offered hope to young people who felt trapped by circumstances beyond their control. Clay, inspired by the positive response to his speech, started drawing pictures that illustrated the concept of chosen families. His artwork, simple but profound, was featured in several child psychology publications and became a tool that therapists use to help children understand that love comes in many forms. Eleanor, who had initially worried that the public nature of our situation might harm the children, found herself becoming an advocate for grandparents' rights and protective custody arrangements. Her experience navigating the legal system to keep Anna and Clay safe led to her involvement with organizations that helped other grandparents in similar situations. The ripple effects reached international levels when human rights organizations began using the children's story as an example of how legal systems could better protect children from family-based abuse. Their speech was translated into dozens of languages and became part of training materials for social workers, judges, and child advocates around the world. But amid all the attention and advocacy work, the most important changes were happening quietly in our daily lives. Anna threw herself into her studies with renewed focus, her confidence soaring as she realized she could use her intelligence and communication skills to help others. She started a peer support group at school for children dealing with family trauma, becoming a leader among her classmates despite her young age. Clay's artistic talents flourished as he found healthy ways to express emotions that had been suppressed for years. His drawings evolved from simple family portraits to complex illustrations that depicted concepts like safety, love, and belonging. Art therapy became a regular part of his routine, not because he needed healing anymore, but because he had discovered a passion. Both children excelled academically, their grades improving dramatically as the constant stress of their father's presence was permanently removed from their lives. Teachers noted their increased participation in class, their willingness to take risks with learning, and their natural empathy toward classmates who were struggling. The house Eleanor had purchased became more than just a residence. It became a sanctuary where 3 generations of women and children had learned to create their own definition of family. We hosted holiday dinners for other blended families, summer barbecues for Anna and Clay's friends, and quiet Sunday mornings where the only agenda was being together. Mark's attempt to use his Beth as a final act of control had backfired spectacularly, creating instead a catalyst for positive change that extended far beyond our small family. His children's rejection of his manipulation had become a beacon of hope for countless others who were struggling to break free from toxic family dynamics. The man who had dismissed me as just the babysitter had inadvertently created the perfect stage for his children to publicly declare that sometimes the people who aren't related to you by blood are the ones who love you most completely. 6 months after the funeral that changed everything, I found myself standing in a courthouse for an entirely different reason. This time, Anna and Clay weren't victims or witnesses. They were petitioners in their own adoption proceeding, requesting that I become their legal mother in every sense of the word. The formal adoption process had been surprisingly straightforward once Mark's death eliminated the final legal obstacles. Eleanor had not only supported our decision, but had actively advocated for it, understanding that making our family official would provide Anna and Clay with the ultimate security they deserved.
Miss Carson, Judge Popplewell said, The same judge who had overseen the custody hearing that removed the children from Mark's legal control. These proceedings are somewhat unusual in that the children themselves initiated this petition. Anna, Clay, would you like to tell the court why you want to be adopted? Anna, now 11 and even more articulate than she'd been at her father's funeral, stood with the poise of someone who had learned that her voice mattered. Your Honor, we want to be adopted because we want our legal family to match our real family. Olivia has been our mom in every way that matters since we were little. Now we want the law to recognize what's been true in our hearts for years. Clay, at 9, was less formal but no less certain. We want to have the same last name as Mom, and we want to make sure that if anything ever happens, we'll always be together. Plus, Mom deserves to be officially recognized for all the mom stuff she does. The simplicity of their reasoning cut through years of legal complexity and bureaucratic procedure. This wasn't about inheritance or custody disputes or protection from abusive relatives. This was about 3 people who had chosen each other, requesting that the law acknowledge what they had built together. The transformation in our lives since Mark's death had been remarkable. With the threat of his manipulation permanently removed, both children had flourished in ways that amazed even me. Anna had been accepted into a prestigious gifted program at the local university, where she was taking advanced courses in psychology and social work. Her goal, she announced regularly, was to become a child advocate who could help other kids navigate the system that had ultimately protected her. Clay, at 9, was less formal but no less certain. We want to have the same last name as Mom, and we want to make sure that if anything ever happens, we'll always be together. Plus, Mom deserves to be officially recognized for all the mom stuff she does. The simplicity of their reasoning cut through years of legal complexity and bureaucratic procedure. This wasn't about inheritance or custody disputes or protection from abusive relatives. This was about 3 people who had chosen each other, requesting that the law acknowledge what they had built together. The transformation in our lives since Mark's death had been remarkable. With the threat of his manipulation permanently removed, both children had flourished in ways that amazed even me. Anna had been accepted into a prestigious gifted program at the local university, where she was taking advanced courses in psychology and social work. Her goal, she announced regularly, was to become a child advocate who could help other kids navigate the system that had ultimately protected her. Clay had discovered a talent for public speaking that rivaled his artistic abilities. He had been invited to speak at several conferences about children's rights, sharing his perspective on what it meant to choose your family. His innocent wisdom and natural charisma made him a powerful voice for change, and organizations across the country were requesting his participation in their advocacy efforts. Eleanor had sold her own house and moved in with us permanently, creating a multi-generational household that defied conventional family structures but worked perfectly for our unique situation. She had become not just a grandmother to Anna and Clay, but a true partner in raising them, sharing bedtime stories and homework supervision and the countless small responsibilities that come with parenting. Our home had become a gathering place for other non-traditional families, foster children aging out of the system, single parents building support networks, grandparents raising grandchildren, and countless others who had learned that family is about commitment rather than genetics. The financial aspects of our life had stabilized as well. The life insurance policy that Mark had taken out on me, the one intended to fund his escape after my murder, had been successfully claimed after his death, providing security for the children's education and our family's future. The irony of Mark's planned murder weapon becoming the foundation of his children's college funds wasn't lost on any of us. By the power vested in me by the state, Judge Popplewell announced, I hereby grant this petition. Anna Carson and Clay Carson, you are now the legal children of Olivia Carson, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. The gavel fell with a sound like thunder, officially ending the last connection between the children and the man who had tried to destroy them. They were no longer the Hartwell children, survivors of their father's crimes. They were simply Anna and Clay Carson, beloved daughter and son of the woman who had chosen them above everything else. 3 years after the adoption, I received an invitation that would have been unimaginable during the dark days when Mark still controlled our lives.
Anna, now 14 and already thinking about college applications, had been selected to speak at the National Conference on Child Advocacy. Her topic, When Blood Isn't Thicker Than Love, Redefining Family in the 21st Century. As I sat in the hotel ballroom watching my daughter, my legal, official, chosen daughter, address an audience of social workers, lawyers, and child advocates from across the country, I marveled at the confident young woman she had become. Gone was the frightened 8-year-old who had once asked if I was going to leave like everyone else. In her place stood someone who radiated intelligence, compassion, and an unshakable sense of her own worth. When I was young, Anna began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system, I thought family was something that happened to you. I thought you were stuck with whoever shared your DNA, regardless of how they treated you. It took a woman named Olivia Carson to teach me that family is actually something you create.
The audience was captivated as Anna told our story, not with the raw emotion of a traumatized child, but with the analytical precision of someone who had processed her experiences and found meaning in them. She spoke about the difference between biological connections and chosen bonds, about the responsibility adults have to protect children even when those children aren't their own, and about the power that comes from recognizing your own worth. Clay, now 12 and sitting beside me in the audience, beamed with pride as his sister spoke. He had grown into a remarkably empathetic young man whose artistic talents had evolved into a passion for documentary filmmaking. His latest project, a short film about blended families, had won several student competitions and was being used by family therapy organizations as an educational tool. The most important thing I learned, Anna continued, is that being someone's biological child doesn't guarantee love, and being adopted doesn't make that love any less real. My mom, my real mom, the one who chose me and whom I chose in return, taught me that the strongest families are built on daily decisions to show up for each other. After her speech, Anna was approached by dozens of people who wanted to share their own stories of non-traditional families, chosen bonds, and the healing that comes from finding your true place in the world. As I watched her engage with each person individually, offering the same wisdom and compassion that had carried her through her own trauma, I realized that Mark's attempt to destroy our family had actually created something more powerful than he could have imagined. Eleanor, now approaching 75 but more energetic than ever, had become a sought-after speaker in her own right. Her presentation on the grandmother's role in protective custody was being delivered at the same conference, drawing on her experience of choosing her grandchildren's welfare over her loyalty to her own son. Some people ask me if I regret turning against Mark, she had told me the night before. But you can't turn against someone who was never really on your side to begin with. The Mark I raised, the son I thought I knew, would never have hurt his children. The man who murdered Sheila and threatened you wasn't my son. He was a stranger wearing my son's face. Our home had become a model for successful blended families, with researchers and social workers regularly requesting interviews about our experience. The house that Eleanor had purchased as a refuge had evolved into something more significant, a demonstration that family structures based on love and choice could be just as stable and nurturing as traditional biological arrangements. Anna's college applications were already generating interest from prestigious universities across the country. Her essay about resilience and chosen family had moved admissions officers to tears, and several schools were competing to offer her full scholarships. Clay's artistic portfolio was attracting attention from youth arts programs, and he had been accepted into a prestigious summer camp for young filmmakers. Most importantly, both children had developed into individuals who understood their own worth and refused to accept less than they deserved from the people in their lives. They had learned, through our example and their own experience, that love is a choice made daily, not an obligation imposed by genetics. On a quiet Sunday morning 5 years after Mark's death, I found myself in the kitchen making pancakes, the same kitchen where this story began, though in a different house with a different understanding of what family meant. Anna, now 16 and preparing for her senior year of high school, was explaining her plans for a gap year before college, during which she wanted to work with children aging out of foster care.
I want to show them what you showed me, she said, helping Clay set the table with the easy familiarity of siblings who had chosen each other. That your past doesn't determine your future, and that the family you choose can be stronger than the one you're born into. Clay, at 14, was documenting our Sunday morning routine with his ever-present camera, part of an ongoing project about the ordinary moments that make extraordinary families. His work had matured beyond his years, capturing the quiet intimacy of chosen love with an artist's eye for truth. Eleanor, now in her late 70s but still sharp as ever, sat at the table reading news articles about the latest developments in child protection legislation, laws that had been influenced, in part, by the changes Anna and Clay's story had sparked in the national conversation about family rights. "You know what I realized?" Clay said, pausing in his filming to look directly at me. "Dad was wrong about everything, but he was especially wrong about you being just the babysitter. Babysitters leave when their shift ends. Moms stay forever."
The simplicity of his observation captured everything that Mark had failed to understand. In his arrogance and cruelty, he had seen caregiving as a service to be purchased, love as a resource to be controlled, and family as a hierarchy to be dominated. He had never grasped that the strongest bonds are forged not by obligation or ownership, but by the daily choice to show up for each other. As we sat around the table sharing breakfast and planning our day, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The frightened, grieving children I had first met were now confident young people with bright futures and unshakable knowledge of their own worth. The desperate babysitter fighting to protect them had become their legal mother, their chosen family, their safe harbor in any storm. Mark Hartwell had intended his dismissive words to remind me of my place in his hierarchy. Instead, they had become a rallying cry for everyone who had ever been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed by people who confused power with worth. I was never just the babysitter. I was the woman who loved his children enough to risk everything to protect them. I was the mother they chose when they were free to choose. I was the family they built when they learned that family isn't about genetics, it's about commitment. And in the end, that made all the difference.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.